Now I'm on. There we go. All right. I promise I can drive this thing. This is the best chance I got at being good tonight, is turning on the microphone. I just want you to know that. I don't know about you, but I miss Aaron already. And this is my first class to teach for him. I was sitting at home last night and I was studying this, and I started on Monday night, and I just, as I typically do, I'll read through the lesson when I'm teaching. I'll read through the lesson and I'll answer the questions kind of like when I'm in the class. I'll go through and I'll make all the answers, and then I'll kind of set it aside. And then I'll loop back the next day generally, and I will start to go back through and look at it through the lens of a teacher and start to dig a little bit deeper. And so when I got through on Monday night, I was like, okay, I could answer the questions. And then when I went back and started thinking through the lens of the teacher, and then I pulled out the notes and some of the points that Aaron wanted to make, by the time I got to about 7 o'clock last night, I thought I was completely incapable of teaching this lesson. So I went for a walk, all right? So about 6,000 steps later, I came back in, took a shower, and I sat back down. And by 9 o'clock, I was like, I got to go Google some stuff because I'm confused about kings, okay, and these orders. And so by about 10 o'clock, I think I had created a chart that we're going to go over in just a minute, and we're going to see. So we're going to study this tonight. You know, Bob Turner told me a little while ago, he goes, Aaron made a chart. And I said, well, Bob, come up here and explain that chart to us. And he said he was busy. So anyway, there is a chart, and I looked over that same chart last night. And, when you start to throw these timelines together and put the whole thing together, I was just Googling, like, simple timeline of the kings. Man, people don't have the same definition of simple as I do, okay? But nonetheless, I did come up with something that I want to start class with tonight, because what I'm trying to do for us tonight is just lay out who are the characters or the kings in our study for 2 Kings 14. 2 Kings 14 is our study for this evening, and we're going to begin on page 11 in just a few minutes, and our goal is to get through 2 Kings 14 this evening. And you all know how good I am with time management, and so we'll see how that goes. Before we start, we're going to pause and have a word of prayer, and let's bow our heads together. Our God and our Father in heaven, we humbly bow before you. Dear God, we're thankful that you hear our prayers. And we're thankful, God, that even some in our audience this evening are here after our prayers to you have been answered. And we pray, God, that you will continue to bless all who are in need of your care. Help us, God, now as we study, that we may gain some understanding, and that we may gain some things from our study this evening that will help us in our walk to live with you in heaven one day. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so as we open up our study tonight, the very first thing that I want to do before we even really get into the material is I want to take a look at this, okay? I've got a map here on the right-hand side to your right-hand side with the kingdom of Israel to the north, the kingdom of Judah down here to the south. And I've color-coded this nicely. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a list of the kings from the north and the kings from the south that are involved in this chapter as we study this evening. And so right off the bat, we'll look at 2 Kings chapter 13 and verse 25. This is the last chapter, or the last verse in 2 Kings chapter 13. So as we end 2 Kings chapter 13, who are the kings of the north and the south? Who's the king of the north as we get to the end of chapter 13? That's what I thought. This is, Not Amaziah. Joash is one of the kings. And if you read the ESV, Joash is two of the kings, which is part of the confusion in 2 Kings 14 and verse 1. It was for me. So as we come to the end here of 2 Kings 13, Jehoash, who is also called Joash at times, is the king of the north, and the king of the south is Joash. So in reading my Bible in 2 Kings chapter 14 and verse 1, because that's the next thing I'm going to ask you, or who are the kings beginning in chapter 14. My Bible says, in the second year of Joash, the son of Joahaz, king of Israel, Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, began to reign. I'm like, what? Joash and Joash. Well, that's what the ESV says. You can hear me. That's awesome. Dalton, will you look in that closet and see if the wireless mic is there and bring it to me? And I'll just walk like around like I Phil Donahue for a little while. Anybody remember that? So again, I don't want to lose our audience online. I mean, I know you can hear me, but I know also that they're going to struggle to hear me. So while we're trying to get this microphone straight, I'll use the wireless handheld and hope that I don't have to use this the whole time. All right. Who's up top? David, are you still up top? I got the handheld wireless. This is going pretty well so far. Derek, you're the third assignment I'm giving, okay? Who knows how to, does anybody know how to run the soundboard up there? Because I can't do that and teach. So, all right, bring that to me, but somebody's still got to get me on wireless, whatever number Ruben is. So I'm not sure who's up top. It looks like nobody, but if somebody can run up top. Oh, wait a second. I'm on. What am I on? Oh, I'm on this. This is a calamity. I'm sorry about that. David, if you're up top, if you will switch me over to lapel 2, I am on Ruben's microphone now as soon as I get it plugged in. All right, am I on? I am not. Switch me over to Ruben, lapel 2. Somebody may go up top. I'm not sure who has the control. Run up there and look, Darius, at lapel 2. Oh, there's David. Lapel 2, please. So, evidently, there we go. Now we're good, and Darius, you can come get this. And we've gotten through 6 minutes of class, and I haven't taught any error yet, I don't think. So that's a plus, all right? Now, where were we? 2 Kings chapter 14. Thank you, David, for that help. And Darius will still have the mic if we have comments, and I will make sure this gets charged so we can hear Aaron on Sunday morning. All right, so when we get to 2 Kings 14, as I said, in the ESV, Joash, a little confusing, but if you look at other translations, I have, one of the things that's helped me a great deal is I have this chronological Bible, okay? And this chronological Bible has helped me a great deal as I've studied this, because when you get to 2 Kings 14, you've kind of got to split 2 Kings 14 into two sections. The first 22 verses or so, and then the final, whatever it is, verse 23 through 29, are the second half. And shoved in between there, chronologically, you will go and then study part of 2 Chronicles, like the last 6 verses of 2 Chronicles 23, 2 Chronicles 24, and 2 Chronicles 25. And so if you read those 3 things in conjunction with 2 Kings 14, they all tie together pretty nicely. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but there's also 3 prophets, at least 3 prophets, that are a part of these chapters as well. Can anybody tell me who those 3 prophets are? The first one we see in 2 Kings 14. Tell me who it is. Who's the prophet? Jonah, that's right. So Jonah, I think he shows up about verse 26, if I'm remembering correctly. And then, not really showing up here, but if we go and read the prophets, there's 2 other prophets who actually prophesied during this time, particularly of the king Amaziah. Who were those prophets? One of them was Hosea. Not Nehemiah. Say Amos. That's right, Amos. Okay, that's right. So Amos and Hosea, and both of those tell us in the first chapter and first verse of both of those prophets, it tells us that they prophesied in the time of Uzziah. Okay, now we're going to see that in just a minute. So that's jumping ahead, but we'll see what that is. So in 2 Kings chapter 14, we already know that one of the kings is named Jehoash or Joash. He's still the king, right? But we see in 2 Kings 14 verse 1, Amaziah comes onto the scene, right? And he is the son of Joash, the one that's just referred to as Joash. That's Amaziah. And then the next change in king comes in the north or the south? In the north, around chapter 4, around verse 16. And who is that going to be? Yep, Jeroboam the second. And Jeroboam the second is going to be king for 41 years. Anyone know what's special about that 41 years? It's the longest any king from the north reigned, 41 years, okay? So now we get past this. I'm going to get back into my notes here and make sure I've got this correct. But in 2 Kings 14 and verse 21, who's going to come on the scene a little bit later? Not Amaziah, but Azariah. So we've had a lot of similar names. We see that throughout the kings. And so we'll see Azariah. And Azariah is also called Uzziah. Okay, so in Hosea 1 and verse 1 and Amos 1:1, he is referred to as Uzziah. And so that is the same person. And so this is the time frame and this time in which they reigned. And then as we get down to the very end, 2 Kings 14:29, we'll see the next king of the north, and that is... Yep, Zechariah. And so I don't have this on the chart, but I kind of put this together mathematically as I continue to try to look and understand. But if you look at the time frame between 2 Kings 14 verse 1 and verse 16, I'll say 14 to 15 years. We know that in the 15th year of Amaziah's reign, Jeroboam became king. And he reigned 29 years, but he lived 15 years after the death of Jehoash. And if you add 15 and 15, that makes 30. And you're like, well, what's wrong? Because it said he reigned 29 years. What's the deal with that? Remember, we got to go back to remember how they counted time. Remember, Jesus goes on the cross on a Friday and it comes out on a Sunday. To us, that's how many days? It's like a day and a half at the most, or 2. But it was a part of 3 days, right? Thus the 3 days in the grave. And so I think that's the difference here is the part, the 29 and some years, parts of that. So it's the difference there between 14 and 15. Not that it's that important, but from Jeroboam down to Zechariah is how many years? 41, right? Because Jeroboam reigned for 41 years. And so if you put the math together, I think this whole chapter covers about 55 years. And I got to tell you, when we think sometimes reading through history in one chapter, just 29 verses, 55 years. That's a lot of time, isn't it, to pass? And so just putting that in perspective. And I say all of that to say that I might be wrong on that if I don't have the timeline exactly straight. And Aaron can correct me on Sunday. But as I've just continued to look at this, I tell you, I don't think I could come to that conclusion last night. Because I continue to still be confused. But after putting this together and putting in some numbers, kind of, I think that's kind of where we stand. So I know we spent a lot of time there kind of setting this up, but I just kept getting confused as I was reading through. And so I wanted to put the players on the board. And we'll kind of leave that up as we go. Now let's look here at what's happened. Kind of in chapter 13, we start seeing what happened to the land. So to land. Say that out loud. Okay, they had been losing land, but in 13 we start seeing them get some land back, right? They start getting some of that land back. Jehoash had done a good job of getting land back, and so there was land that was coming back into both the northern and the southern tribe. And so that's what we see happening. They had been harassed by all these surrounding nations. And they start to get some of this land because God has compassion on them. If you look at 2 Kings 13, verses 4, verse 5, verse 23, God is going to have compassion on them. And yet Israel just still did not repent. And so, we'll start to see the land come back to them more and more, as we're going to see land coming back to Israel later in 2 Kings chapter 14. So as we said, near the end of chapter 13, we know that the military in the southern kingdom, or in the northern kingdom rather, under Jehoash, we know that it's been depleted. Remember, there was talk of there's barely 50 horsemen, and the numbers are really, really low as they've been out and they've been in battle, and they've not done well, and the numbers are really, really low. But then Jehoash would come in and he would build that back up, and we know that. We know that Jehoash was able to sort of build that back up because if we look in 2 Chronicles chapter 25 and verse 6, we'll see that Amaziah is actually trying to reach out and get 100,000 footmen to go help him in battle in 2 Chronicles 25 and verse 6. He tries to rent 100,000 footmen. And yet at the end of chapter 13, there weren't 100,000 footmen in the whole army. And now they've got this number that they could rent out. Of course, Amaziah ends up not taking these men. Why did he not take these men? Okay, he was told not to do that, right? The prophet came to him, or the priest came and said, don't do that. You know you're not supposed to be associating with this group from Israel. You can't take it. To which he says, well, but I already spent the money, right? If I've already spent the money, that's kind of the way I am on my diet sometimes. Well, the brownies are already there. I got to eat them before I can get back on my diet, right? Or I can throw them in the trash and call it a loss, okay? And so that's what's happened here. And so he said, hey, yeah, you can't take it. And so they end up telling all those 100,000 men, go back home, not going to use you. Okay, and then so we know. I know I'm kind of jumping around. I apologize for that a little bit. I'm going to try to get back up to the beginning of. I'll come back to that thought. I'm going to get back to the beginning of 2 Kings chapter 14, and we'll get in our book for just a minute on page 11, and we'll talk a little bit about the beginning of Amaziah and his reign in 2 Kings chapter 14, really verses 1 through 6. There's a couple of questions that Aaron asked here in 1 through 6. It said, the first question was, what good things can be said about Amaziah? Was his father Joash good or bad? Joash, his father Joash, good or bad? Ended bad, but he did right in the sight of the Lord early, right? But he ended bad, okay? And in part he ended bad because he only did sort of good, right? And that's the lesson that several of these men are going to learn. They might have done, quote unquote, right in the sight of the Lord, and that's what we're going to see with Amaziah. But then it's going to say, but he didn't go all the way. He didn't do everything he should have done, which was the problem with his father as well. So what good things can we say about Amaziah? Raise your hand so Darius can get a workout and get some steps in. Raise your hand. Tell me something good that Amaziah did. Well, I kind of cheated there because I already said one of those things, right? He did right in the sight of the Lord. But who can add that? Who can give some proof that he was trying to do what was right in the sight of the Lord? Okay, all the way over here. All right, so we'll come over here and we'll get the idea. You know, in verse 3, when it says he did right in the sight of the Lord, it said, yet not like David. So it said, hey, not all the way good. But what other proof do we have that he was doing good?
Well, he didn't kill the children of the murderers who struck down his father.
Okay, so he killed the murderers that struck down his father, but he didn't kill the children of the murderers. That doesn't seem very smart, does it? Or does it? Why is not killing the sons of the murderers, why is that trying to do right in the sight of God? It was in the law. Deuteronomy chapter 24 and verse 6 would be the specific place in the law where it would say that you can't do that, that you don't kill the sons for the sins of the father. By the way, very popular doctrine out there, right? That we're born with sin. Bible very clearly teaches that you don't kill, that the sins of the father don't follow the son, right? And it's not just that passage. There's other passages as well. But certainly that teaches. And then, so I said Deuteronomy 24 verse 6. Deuteronomy 24 verse 16. So I'm going to make sure I get that right. And then in 2 Chronicles, the account in 2 Chronicles, in 2 Chronicles 25 and verse 4, very clearly states that this was seen to be good, that he made this decision because he was trying to follow the law of God. And so he was making this attempt, but then we got that statement that says, but not like David. And what did he not get rid of? The high places, right? The high places. He didn't completely wipe out all of the worship that was not according to the will of God and such. And so that was his failure. So his shortcomings, well, man, we just answered that too, right? He didn't get rid of the high places. He didn't finish the job that his father, well, at first I put that his father had started. And then I marked that out and I said that started during the early reign of his father. Because as Kristen said a minute ago, Joash didn't really end well. He didn't carry through either to make sure that those things were completely removed. Well, let's move down a little bit to verse 7 through 14. And what challenge did Amaziah make to Joash? Somebody raise your hand and tell me, what was the challenge that Amaziah made to Jehoash? See, I'm saying Joash. Oh, come over, right over here. Raise your hand. I can see your mouth, but he's got to see your hand. Raise that high. Tell him to come bring you the microphone. And then say what you just mouthed to me.
He didn't go to battle, to go to battle against each other.
Yeah, Amaziah, he's out there. He's winning. He's winning some battles. And all of a sudden he's going, man, I am good. And he reaches out to Jehoash and he says, you and I need to square off face to face. And Jehoash says, I'll meet you in the parking lot. No, Jehoash says, you don't want to do that. You really don't, okay? Because this isn't going to end well for you, and it isn't going to end well for your people. You don't want to do this. And like any good king who's bad, he doesn't take the advice, does he? And he still insists in going out to battle and meeting face to face in this challenge. And so again, as we said in verse 10, you have indeed struck down Edom. Your heart has lifted you up. Be content with your glory and stay home. For why would you provoke trouble so that you fall and Judah with you? But verse 11 says, but Amaziah would not listen. And so Jehoash, king of Israel, went up, and he and Amaziah, king of Judah, faced one another in battle. And Judah was defeated, verse 12, by Israel, and every man fled to his home. And then we know that Jehoash went in and broke down part of the wall, looted the city, took all of these things, and just did a number on Amaziah's people. And captured Amaziah also during this process. And so Jehoash would ultimately win this battle. And then it seems like things are moving pretty quickly, right? Because right after this, the next thing that we read in verses 14 and 15, sorry, I'm behind on slides. Right after we get to this through 14 to 15, what is the next thing we read about? You could cheat from the screen. The death of Jehoash, right? The death of Jehoash. And so he dies. And who was it that was going to take over for him? Remember our slide at the beginning? Say it out loud. Jeroboam, right? Remember, this is the northern king, Jehoash, who's now dying. And in the north, Jeroboam II is going to take over. for him. Now, things get a little bit out of order during this section as we hear about that, and then we go to see about Amaziah. We see about Azariah taking over, and then we go back to more about Jeroboam. And I think the intent of the author is, hey, I'm now going to tell you about Jeroboam's reign, but also, hey, let me get in this king change here where Amaziah then dies after 15 years after he was taken captive, after Jeroboam became king, after Joash died. For about another 15 years he would live, then he would die, and he would also be plotted against, right? Where would he flee to before he died? Lachish, right? And we had, let me see, right over here, you can see on your map, he would have fled down here to Lachish, which is not far, but it was a former fortified city, and he would get down there, but he was being plotted against, and he would not live there, and he would be killed, and then after we get through this plot against Amaziah, and the people took Azariah and made him king, then we come to verse 23. And we get back in verse 23, back to the story of Jeroboam, okay? So are we following this? Because it does jump around just a little bit. Kristen has a run fast up here to Kristen. And not really, don't hurt yourself. But Kristen has a question, and the look on her face scares me when Kristen asks me questions. Usually she texts me, and I have time to think about them.
It's just a question of Amaziah.
Okay.
He stayed captured for 15 years in Israel. He was ruling Judah from being captured in Israel. I guess my question. I didn't know. I couldn't find what happened to him.
I struggled with that as well. So nobody was supposed to ask me that question. Ask Aaron. It almost seemed to me, because he was still king, he was left king. And somebody else might have a better idea. If you do, raise your hand high. But it seemed to me almost as though maybe he was still king, but he was under the control of Jeroboam somehow. That's what I got, but I could be wrong.
But Greg, it said he lived, he didn't reign. Verse 17 said he lived.
Well, if you say that, it's going to throw my whole 29 plus 15 and all that stuff off. I don't know. Here's the thing. Here's why I think I'm going to make my counter argument to that. It says in chapter 14 and verse 1 that he reigned 29 years. He also came in 15 years, and that's according to let's see, Jeroboam came in 14 and verse 16, chapter 14 verse 16, in the 15th year of Amaziah's reign, it says. And then Amaziah, we also know, would live for 15 years after the death of Jehoash, which would have been when Jeroboam came into. So those number of years closely match the 29. So I think that he very potentially was still reigning. He was still king until his death. That's when they took and put in a new king. And yet the city had been destroyed and really under the control, if you will, of the north at that point. And so he was king, but he was sort of the